She stood near the audition line wearing worn sneakers and a blue hoodie, humming softly under her breath, though she could not hear the notes. The grand hall was a towering space, filled with echoing voices, polished floors, and camera crews preparing for the afternoon's televised talent showcase. Her fingers fidgeted with the frayed hem of her sweatshirt as she waited quietly, unnoticed by most. Her name was Ellie Harper, and this was the day her world would shift in ways no one could have predicted. When her number was called, she stepped forward, the hush of anticipation broken only by the stage manager directing her into the spotlight. The crowd barely glanced up. She did not fit the mold. No glitter, no dramatic entrance. Just a calm, deaf girl walking onto a stage most only dreamed of reaching. One of the judges, a world-famous pop star named Lennox Ray, leaned back in his seat, unimpressed. Known for his sharp tongue and sharper sense of style, Lennox was the kind of artist whose words could launch or ruin a career with a single sentence. As Ellie stood center stage, the host adjusted the mic and asked if she was ready. She nodded, not hearing him, but understanding the rhythm of movement in the room. Lennox raised an eyebrow, glancing sideways at the other judges. "You do know this is a singing competition, right?" he asked flatly, not to her, but to the host. A few people in the crowd chuckled. Ellie's cheeks flushed, but she stayed composed. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and nodded again. The music cue rolled. She did not move. The room held its breath, unsure of what was happening. Then her hands rose slowly in front of her, signing each lyric with a fluency and grace that made the words shimmer even in silence. Lennox laughed, a short, dismissive sound that echoed through the studio. "What is this?" he asked, turning to the others. "Is this a joke audition?" The laughter in the room grew louder, though one or two judges looked uncertain, even uncomfortable. Ellie continued her performance, unwavering. Her signing told the story of the song with a depth no voice could have matched. Every line was etched in expression, every beat captured in motion. But to those unwilling to see past sound, it was invisible. When she finished, there was no applause, just a quiet cough from the back and Lennox shaking his head. "I am sorry," he said. "This is not the place for interpretive movement. We are looking for singers." Her lips moved as she signed again, softly. "I am a singer. I sing with my hands and my soul." But he had already turned away. The next contestant was called. Ellie walked off stage in silence. Backstage, a production assistant approached her awkwardly. "That was unique," she said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for your time." Ellie gave a small nod, then headed toward the exit, the sound of rising applause for the next performer trailing behind her like a shadow. Outside the venue, rain had begun to fall. She sat on a bench just beyond the service entrance, letting the cold drops wash away the sting of humiliation. But somewhere deep inside, the flame of purpose remained lit. She had not come for fame or pity. She had come to show that music did not live in sound alone. 2 days later, a video clip from the show surfaced online. 30 seconds of Ellie on stage, Lennox's laughter, the judges' dismissive glances. The caption read, "Deaf Girl Signs Song" instead of singing, and it quickly went viral. But not for the reasons the producers had hoped. Comments flooded in, thousands by the hour. Some mocked, but many defended. They called her brave, inspiring, revolutionary. Musicians from across genres began to share her clip, noting the power of storytelling in her hands. A well-known classical pianist tweeted that he had never been more moved by a performance he could not hear. The conversation shifted, not about ability, but about expression, not about what was missing, but about what was present in its place. Within a week, Ellie had been invited to speak on multiple news programs, though she declined most of them. She was not interested in being a spectacle, but she accepted one offer from a small community center in Philadelphia that had hosted a yearly music and accessibility summit. There, on a quiet evening in front of an audience that included children with cochlear implants, elderly attendees who had lost their hearing with age, and parents struggling to find inclusive spaces for their kids, Ellie signed the same song once more. This time, the room erupted in applause. It was not polished or perfect. It was real, pure, honest. Lennox Ray, meanwhile, continued his press tour for his latest single, unaware that he had sparked something larger than any chart-topping hit. But that would not last long. A week after the clip had gone viral, Lennox Ray arrived at a charity gala hosted by a major recording label in Los Angeles. Cameras flashed as he stepped out of a black sedan, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's rent. He moved through the crowd with practiced charm, offering photo ops and sound bites to reporters eager for a headline. When asked about the incident on the talent show, he waved it off with a half smile. "Every season has its odd auditions," he said. Part of the entertainment. But beneath the surface, he had begun to feel the pressure. Sponsors had reached out with questions. Advocacy groups had started petitions, and his social media had become a war zone. Still, Lennox was confident in his brand. He had faced controversy before and survived. This would pass too. That night, the gala featured performances by emerging artists. Halfway through the program, the host stepped onto the stage with a special announcement. "Tonight, we are honored to introduce a guest who has redefined what it means to perform. Please welcome Ellie Harper." The crowd murmured in confusion. Lennox's smile faltered. From the side of the stage, Ellie walked into view, dressed simply in a dark blouse and flowing pants, her hair pulled back neatly. The lights dimmed. A soft instrumental began to play. She moved with clarity and grace, signing the lyrics of a haunting ballad as the orchestra carried the melody behind her. The room fell completely still. Eyes locked on her hands, on the way her expressions captured every nuance, every rise and fall of emotion. In a room full of noise, it was the silence that carried the most weight. When the music stopped, the applause was thunderous. Some people stood, some wiped away tears. Lennox remained seated, his hands still, his face unreadable. As Ellie exited the stage, she passed him without a glance. The message was clear. She did not need his approval. She had never needed it. Backstage, a producer from a major label approached her. "We would love to collaborate," he said. "If you are interested in producing signed music videos or even a special project on inclusive expression." Ellie thanked him, but her answer was simple. "I am not here to be a trend. I am here to open doors." That night, the gala's highlight reel was shared across networks, and once again, Ellie's story captured the world's attention. Not because she had been mocked, but because she had risen above it without anger, without vengeance. She had spoken without speaking, and the world had finally listened. Back at his estate, Lennox sat alone watching the replay on a late-night segment. The host had praised Ellie's courage and artistry while making a pointed observation. "Sometimes, the greatest performances are the ones you almost missed because you were not listening." Lennox turned off the screen. For the first time in years, he felt unsure. His next public appearance came at a press conference to announce his upcoming tour. As reporters gathered, one question kept surfacing. Would he address the Ellie Harper controversy? Lennox cleared his throat and leaned toward the microphone. "I want to say something that I should have said weeks ago." The room went quiet. He continued. "I failed to recognize artistry when it did not come in the package I expected. I judged someone not by their talent, but by their difference. And that was wrong." He paused. "Ellie Harper is more than an inspiration. She is an artist, and I owe her an apology." The headlines the next morning were not about the tour. They were about accountability. The apology sparked a new conversation, not about cancellation, but about redemption. Ellie, when asked for comment, responded with dignity. Words are easy, actions matter more. In the weeks that followed, Lennox reached out through a mutual contact, not to stage a publicity stunt, but to ask if she would meet. Ellie agreed under one condition. It would not be about cameras or interviews. It would be a real conversation. They met at a modest cafe in downtown Los Angeles, far from the lights and velvet ropes of their previous encounters. Lennox arrived first, visibly nervous, his once impenetrable confidence tempered by genuine humility. When Ellie walked in, he stood awkwardly, unsure whether to offer a handshake or simply sit. She took a seat across from him, her interpreter beside her, though she often read lips with surprising accuracy. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded once. He took a breath. "I was wrong, not just that day, but in the way I have seen the world. I thought music had one language, one format. But watching you perform, I realized I have been deaf in a different way." Ellie listened, her gaze steady. When he finished, she replied calmly, "I do not want your guilt. I want your growth. What you do next, that is what will matter." Lennox nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I want to do better. I want to help amplify voices like yours, not because it looks good, but because it is right. Ellie offered a small smile. Then start listening. The rest will follow. The following month brought a quiet but meaningful change in Lennox's world. He had stepped back from the spotlight not with a dramatic announcement or a trending hashtag, but through deliberate action. He enrolled in a sign language course at a small arts academy in San Francisco, choosing anonymity over attention. Each class humbled him. The fluid movement of hands that once seemed foreign became a language of story and rhythm. His fingers stumbled at first, his expressions unsure, but Ellie's words echoed in his mind. Start listening. The rest will follow. Meanwhile, Ellie continued her journey, now collaborating with schools and performance centers across the country to introduce signed music into mainstream curriculum. Her performances became a bridge between the hearing and non-hearing communities, and each time she stood on a stage, she reminded people that music was not bound by sound, it was built on connection. Word of her impact reached beyond the arts. Educational panels invited her to speak. Cultural leaders wrote op-eds about her movement. And still she remained grounded, more interested in the next child who might sign their first lyric than the magazine covers or speaking fees. One afternoon, she received a letter. Handwritten, folded neatly in a thick envelope. It was from Lennox. He wrote not about redemption or forgiveness, but about gratitude, about learning, about what it meant to fail in public and to try again in private. Inside the envelope was a program brochure for an upcoming music festival that Lennox had quietly helped organize. Its focus was accessibility, multiple stages for different sensory needs, open captioning, on-site interpreters, and one featured act listed in bold near the center of the page, Ellie Harper. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that came not from vindication, but from validation, the kind that said change was slow, but it was happening. The festival arrived on a warm spring day, drawing thousands from all walks of life. Ellie stood behind the stage curtain, preparing for her set. Her heart beat steadily, not with nerves, but with purpose. As the host introduced her, cheers rippled through the open-air crowd. This time, she did not walk out alone. Behind her came a choir, half-hearing, half-deaf, each member trained to sing or sign in harmony. The music began, and together they filled the stage with sound and silence, melody and motion. The crowd responded not just with claps, but with raised hands waving in the air, a deaf applause, just as loud in meaning. Backstage, Lennox watched from the wings, his hand resting on the curtain edge. He no longer saw a girl who had once embarrassed him on live television. He saw a leader, a visionary, an artist whose influence extended far beyond a single performance. When the set ended and Ellie stepped down, he approached, not with fanfare, but with the respect of someone who had finally understood. That was incredible. He signed slowly, careful with each motion. She nodded, correcting one small movement in his phrasing with a gentle touch. "You are getting better," she replied. He grinned sheepishly. Still learning, always learning. The festival's success sparked a wave of similar events across the country. Other artists joined in, many asking Ellie for guidance. She agreed, on one condition. This was not a trend. It was a movement, and movements needed consistency, not flash. At a televised panel 6 weeks later, she sat beside Lennox, now an advocate for inclusive music education. They spoke about failure, about change, and about the courage to admit ignorance and transform it into understanding. One moment stood out. A child from the audience asked, "How do you sing without sound?" Ellie looked at her, then signed gently, "With my heart, always with my heart." Months passed. The world, as always, moved quickly. New controversies rose, new headlines replaced the old. But something lasting had taken root. Arts institutions began expanding their accessibility programs. Music conservatories launched scholarships for deaf performers. Schools created mixed choirs that embraced both sound and sign. And in a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, a little girl born with profound hearing loss watched a recorded performance of Ellie and her choir. Her eyes widened. Her fingers moved instinctively, mimicking the signs. Her parents sat behind her in awe, tears in their eyes. Their daughter had just found her voice, not through ears, but through Ellie. That night, they wrote her a letter, a thank you, not for the fame, not for the headlines, but for showing one child that she did not have to be silent to be heard. The following month brought a quiet but meaningful change in Lennox's world. He had stepped back from the spotlight, not with a dramatic announcement or a trending hashtag, but through deliberate action. He enrolled in a sign language course at a small arts academy in San Francisco, choosing anonymity over attention. Each class humbled him. The fluid movement of hands that once seemed foreign became a language of story and rhythm. His fingers stumbled at first, his expressions unsure, but Ellie's words echoed in his mind. Start listening. The rest will follow. Meanwhile, Ellie continued her journey, now collaborating with schools and performance centers across the country to introduce signed music into mainstream curriculum. Her performances became a bridge between the hearing and non-hearing communities, and each time she stood on a stage, she reminded people that music was not bound by sound. It was built on connection. Word of her impact reached beyond the arts. Educational panels invited her to speak. Cultural leaders wrote op-eds about her movement. And still, she remained grounded, more interested in the next child who might sign their first lyric than the magazine covers or speaking fees. One afternoon, she received a letter, handwritten, folded neatly in a thick envelope. It was from Lennox. He wrote not about redemption or forgiveness, but about gratitude, about learning, about what it meant to fail in public and to try again in private. Inside the envelope was a program brochure for an upcoming music festival that Lennox had quietly helped organize. Its focus was accessibility, multiple stages for different sensory needs, open captioning, on-site interpreters, and one featured act listed in bold near the center of the page, Ellie Harper. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that came not from vindication, but from validation, the kind that said change was slow, but it was happening. The festival arrived on a warm spring day, drawing thousands from all walks of life. Ellie stood behind the stage curtain preparing for her set. Her heart beat steadily, not with nerves, but with purpose. As the host introduced her, cheers rippled through the open-air crowd. This time she did not walk out alone. Behind her came a choir, half hearing, half deaf, each member trained to sing or sign in harmony. The music began, and together they filled the stage with sound and silence, melody and motion. The crowd responded not just with claps, but with raised hands waving in the air, a deaf applause, just as loud in meaning. Backstage, Lennox watched from the wings, his hand resting on the curtain edge. He no longer saw a girl who had once embarrassed him on live television. He saw a leader, a visionary, an artist whose influence extended far beyond a single performance. When the set ended and Ellie stepped down, he approached, not with fanfare, but with the respect of someone who had finally understood. That was incredible. He signed slowly, careful with each motion. She nodded, correcting one small movement in his phrasing with a gentle touch. "You are getting better," she replied. He grinned sheepishly. Still learning. Always learning. The festival's success sparked a wave of similar events across the country. Other artists joined in, many asking Ellie for guidance. She agreed, on one condition. This was not a trend. It was a movement, and movements needed consistency, not flash. At a televised panel 6 weeks later, she sat beside Lennox, now an advocate for inclusive music education. They spoke about failure, about change, and about the courage to admit ignorance and transform it into understanding. One moment stood out. A child from the audience asked, "How do you sing without sound?" Ellie looked at her, then signed gently, "With my heart. Always with my heart." Months passed. The world, as always, moved quickly. New controversies rose, new headlines replaced the old, but something lasting had taken root. Arts institutions began expanding their accessibility programs. Music conservatories launched scholarships for deaf performers. Schools created mixed choirs that embraced both sound and sign. And in a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, a little girl born with profound hearing loss watched a recorded performance of Ellie and her choir. Her eyes widened. Her fingers moved instinctively, mimicking the signs. Her parents sat behind her in awe, tears in their eyes. Their daughter had just found her voice, not through ears, but through Ellie. That night they wrote her a letter, a thank you, not for the fame, not for the headlines, but for showing one child that she did not have to be silent to be heard. 1 year after that first audition, Ellie Harper stood at the entrance of a new arts center being constructed in her hometown. The building was still unfinished. Drywall dust floated in the air, and the echo of drills and hammers bounced off the steel beams, but the vision was already real. The Ellie Harper Center for Inclusive Arts was the first of its kind on the East Coast, a place where deaf and hearing children could learn, create, and perform together. The foyer would feature sound-absorbing panels for clearer acoustics and large digital screens for visual cues. The stage would have haptic flooring to allow performers to feel the beat through vibration. The rehearsal rooms would be equipped with both voice amplification and signing mirrors. Every inch of the space had been designed with inclusivity in mind, right down to the height of the door handles. Ellie walked the halls slowly, visualizing the classrooms, the open studios, the after-school programs. She paused in one of the larger spaces where future performances would take place. A young girl, about 8 years old, peeked through the doorway, holding her mother's hand. She looked shy, unsure if she belonged in the unfinished maze of wires and scaffolding. Ellie knelt to her level and signed gently. "Would you like to see where you might perform one day?" The girl's eyes lit up. She nodded, stepping inside. Her mother followed, smiling through quiet tears. These were the moments Ellie lived for. Not the recognition, not the interviews, but the spark of possibility in a young child's face. Behind her, the lead architect adjusted a tablet mapping out furniture layouts and stage lighting. Ellie consulted on each decision. She had insisted from day one that this would not be a vanity project. It would not bear her name without bearing her values. The funding had come from a mix of donors, some anonymous, others public, including Lennox Ray, who had surprised her by organizing a benefit concert that raised nearly $1 million in a single night. He never once took the stage. He simply stood in the background, helping coordinate performers, tuning microphones, and signing along with the choir backstage. Ellie never asked why he had become so invested. She did not need to. The answer was clear in his actions. He had learned to listen. 6 months later, the center opened with a quiet ceremony. No paparazzi, no fireworks, just families, teachers, artists, and students coming together in shared celebration. Ellie stood at the podium in front of a room filled with children in wheelchairs, children with hearing aids, children signing to their parents, children learning to clap in both sound and sight. She began her speech not with words, but with her hands. Each sign was deliberate, thoughtful, and full of emotion. The interpreter voiced her message aloud for the hearing attendees, but the meaning was already understood in the movement. We are not here to be labeled by what we lack. We are here to create from what we have. We are not broken. We are not less. We are whole, and we are capable of beauty. The applause was not explosive. It was heartfelt, layered in silent cheers and soft hand waves. It was enough. After the ceremony, Ellie walked alone through the now completed hallways, her fingers grazing the walls she had once dreamed of. This was not the destination. It was a beginning, a platform for others to rise. In her office, she placed a framed photo on her desk. It was not of herself. It was of that little girl she had met during construction, now mid-performance in the main hall, signing a song with radiant joy. Later that week, Lennox arrived at the center unannounced. He walked through the front doors humbly, wearing jeans and a simple gray jacket, his face partially hidden under a baseball cap. He found Ellie in the studio wing, seated at a table surrounded by children crafting instruments out of recycled materials. She looked up, smiled, and signed without surprise. "Thought you might stop by." He chuckled softly. "I had to see it with my own eyes." She stood and led him on a tour, past the performance hall, through the digital sound lab, and into the music garden outside, where vibration-sensitive panels responded to movement. "The kids love this part," she said. "They can see the music come to life." Lennox stood quietly, watching a boy leap onto one of the panels and laugh as colored lights danced to the rhythm of his steps. It was beautiful in a way he had never considered. He turned to Ellie, his voice softer than usual. "I owe you a great deal." She shook her head. "You owe it to the people you reach now. Make sure you reach them differently." By the following year, Lennox had taken a different path in his career. His albums still charted well, but they no longer defined him. Instead of massive arena tours, he began hosting smaller, intentionally diverse performances in schools, cultural centers, and rehabilitation clinics. Each show featured guest artists with varying abilities: deaf performers, blind pianists, children with speech impairments reciting poetry through assistive devices. He had gone from being a solo act to a platform for many. It did not earn him as much applause from the industry, but it earned him something more enduring: respect from communities that had once felt invisible. His music evolved too. His latest project, a visual album designed to be fully accessible to deaf audiences, was launched at a joint event co-hosted by the Ellie Harper Center. It included embedded sign interpretation, sound visualization, and lyrical animation. Ellie herself consulted on every frame. On the night of the premiere, she sat in the front row surrounded by students and families watching as Lennox introduced the work. When the screen dimmed and the music began, no one moved. The room was still, absorbing, feeling, seeing. Not every note was heard, but every note was understood. When the credits rolled, the applause was layered, some loud, some silent, all powerful. Afterward, they stepped outside into the cool night air. Ellie stood beneath a street lamp, her arms crossed loosely, eyes watching the stars rather than the fans exiting behind them. Lennox joined her, his voice quiet. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" She nodded. "Of course. I remember every moment." He sighed. "I still hate who I was on that day." Ellie looked at him then, her expression soft but firm. "That day made you who you are now, and that version of you, he is doing something right." Lennox smiled faintly. "I just wish it had not taken someone else's pain to wake me up." Ellie placed a hand on his shoulder. "It was not pain. It was perspective, and you chose to learn from it. Most people never do." They stood in silence, the kind that said everything words could not. Behind them, children played near the entry fountain, signing excitedly about the movie, the lights, the way music danced on the screen. In the months that followed, the ripple effects continued. More schools adopted dual modality music programs. Art scholarships opened for deaf students. Media producers consulted inclusivity specialists before filming. And Ellie, always focused, always humble, kept working. She declined major endorsements. She redirected awards to her center. She mentored young performers, insisting they focus not on fame, but on message. Her story had become a symbol, but she never let it become a brand. One afternoon, she was walking through a community arts festival when a woman approached her with hesitation. She was middle-aged, dressed modestly, and holding the hand of a teenage boy with cochlear implants. He looked up at Ellie with curiosity and admiration. The woman introduced herself as his mother. "We used to hide his hearing loss," she said quietly. "Thought it would protect him. But then we saw your first performance, and we saw how you moved with pride. Now he sings, loudly, not always in tune, but with his whole heart." Ellie knelt and signed to the boy. He smiled, then reached for a small keyboard he carried in his backpack and played her a short melody. It was clunky, a little rushed, but it was beautiful. She listened fully. That evening, she sat on the steps of the center, watching the sun lower behind the rooftops. The quiet moments were her favorite, the ones where no one asked for photos or speeches, just space to think, to breathe, to remember. The world had not changed overnight. There were still doors closed, still systems slow to evolve. But here, in this place she had helped build, the future looked a little wider, a little warmer. She pulled a worn journal from her bag and began writing notes for her next performance. A new piece, something for children, about resilience, about voice. Across the courtyard, she spotted Lennox helping a young performer adjust their mic for a rehearsal. He caught her gaze and waved once. She waved back, smiling, not because of how far they had come, but because of how far there was still to go, and how they would keep going together. A few weeks later, Ellie was invited to speak at an international conference on arts and inclusion. It was held in Vienna, in a historic music hall where centuries earlier, composers had premiered symphonies that changed the world. Now Ellie stood under the same ornate ceilings, not to echo past genius, but to redefine what performance could mean. The room was filled with artists, educators, critics, and cultural leaders from across the globe. Her interpreter stood beside her, but it was Ellie's presence that commanded the room. She did not begin with her resume. She did not list awards or name-drop collaborations. She began with a question. What does it mean to be heard? She paused, letting it settle. Then she signed. Being heard is not just about volume. It is not even about sound. It is about being seen for who you are. It is about being valued, not in spite of your difference, but because of it. The interpreter voiced her words with calm clarity, but eyes remained on Ellie's hands, her face, the story unfolding in silence. She spoke of the audition that changed her life, not because of the humiliation, but because of the clarity it gave her. She spoke of the little girl who signed her first song after watching a video online, of the boy at the arts festival who now used light and vibration to compose symphonies his ears could never hear, of the choirs that were no longer divided between hearing and deaf, but united in expression. And finally, she spoke of Lennox, not by name, but as an example of what happens when someone chooses growth over pride. Her message was not a condemnation, it was a call to look inward, a call to change. When she finished, there was a beat of silence, not out of confusion, but reverence. Then the applause began. A standing ovation, hands raised in the air, clapping or waving, loud or silent, every expression valid, every emotion earned. Backstage, as she removed her mic and gathered her notes, a delegate from a major arts foundation approached her with misty eyes. That was the most profound keynote we have ever hosted, she said. Ellie smiled and signed softly. That is because you finally listened with more than your ears. Later that evening, in her hotel room overlooking the city, Ellie received a message. It was from Lennox, a photo sent without caption. It showed a music class in session. Children, some in wheelchairs, some with hearing aids, some without any labels at all, standing in a circle, learning to sign lyrics while a teacher strummed guitar in the corner. Lennox had funded the program quietly and was visiting unannounced. Ellie stared at the image, heart full. She replied with a simple sign recorded on video. Thank you. The next day, she boarded a flight home. No press followed. No headlines trailed behind. Just her notebook, her purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the ripples she had created were now making waves far beyond what she could ever see. As the months passed, Ellie continued her work, sometimes in the spotlight, often not. She launched a fellowship at her center, training young leaders to carry the mission forward. She co-wrote a children's book about a deaf bird who learned to fly by following the beat of the sky. It was published in 20 languages. She met with policymakers to advocate for arts funding in special education. And in the quiet hours between projects, she walked the halls of her center, checking in on classrooms, sitting in on rehearsals, offering encouragement in the form of gentle signs and even gentler smiles. Her legacy was not a statue or a billboard. It was in the kids who raised their hands to sign instead of speak, in the choirs that welcomed all voices and all silences, in the teachers who saw ability before assumption. It was in the shift, subtle but undeniable, that had begun to change the face of performance around the world. Then, on the anniversary of her first audition, she received an invitation. The same televised talent show where it had all begun was hosting a special episode, an all-stars reunion and a tribute to performers who had shaped the culture. The producers asked her to return, not to compete, to close the show. She hesitated. The stage still carried memories. But after a quiet conversation with her students, she agreed. This time, she would not walk on stage alone. The studio lights were just as bright as she remembered. The sleek floors reflected every movement, and the curved audience rows seemed to close in like they had the first time she stood there alone. But this time was different. Ellie stepped onto the stage surrounded by 20 young performers from her center, all dressed in coordinated deep blue outfits. Some wore hearing aids, some did not. Some signed fluently, others moved to rhythm with the help of light pulses on their wrists and chests. A few held instruments. All held each other's energy like a current pulsing through a single shared circuit. Ellie stood in the middle, her presence quiet but commanding. The audience clapped as the host welcomed her back. They had re-aired her original audition clip during the commercial break, but it was not shown for mockery. It was shown as the beginning of something monumental. Now, the lights dimmed again. The music started, a slow instrumental, piano, strings, soft percussion, and Ellie began to sign. This time, there was no laughter, no sneering, no confusion, just silence, the kind that listens. She signed each word with intention, her movements punctuated by the children harmonizing around her, some signing alongside her, others adding vocal hums and notes, a few creating rhythms with hand drums and body percussion. It was a mosaic of expression, a chorus made of voice, sign, and movement. It built slowly, then soared, becoming something that defied category. Was it a song, a poem, a story? It was all of it, and something more. Halfway through the performance, one child stepped forward alone and began signing a solo passage. Her hands trembled slightly at first, but Ellie reached out, touched her shoulder gently, and kept the rhythm with her own motions. The child found her footing. Her signs grew more fluid, more confident. The rest of the group joined in again, surrounding her in support. It was not just a performance, it was a demonstration of trust, of courage passed hand to hand. The final note arrived, not with sound, but with stillness. Ellie signed the last word, held it suspended in the air, and then slowly lowered her hands. The lights followed, dimming to a soft glow. The room did not erupt. It rose. People stood, not in a burst, but in waves. Hands clapped, hands waved. Some people cried. Others simply stood motionless, overcome. In the control booth, the director removed his headset, tears in his eyes. In the wings, the original host of the show, who had witnessed Ellie's first appearance, stood with a hand over his heart. The moment did not need commentary. It spoke for itself. As the children gathered around her and bowed, Ellie looked toward the judge's table. Lennox sat in the center seat, now a permanent panelist after a career defined not just by music, but by mentorship. He rose with the others, clapping slowly, his face filled with something far deeper than pride. He did not cheer. He did not wave. He signed. Thank you. After the show, in the backstage lounge, Ellie sat with her students, answering questions, adjusting hair ribbons, fixing shoelaces, congratulating each one for their courage. Some were overwhelmed by the crowd's reaction. Others just wanted juice boxes and hugs. One boy asked her if he could do it again next week. Ellie laughed softly and nodded. Maybe sooner than that. A producer approached her quietly. We have had a lot of great finales, but this was something else. Ellie nodded, not seeking praise. It was never about the stage. It was about the shift. In that moment, a little girl approached, maybe 6 years old, clutching a notebook. She signed shyly, "Can I sing like you one day?" Ellie knelt and smiled. "You already do." The next morning, media outlets ran headlines not about who won the season, but about who changed the show forever. Ellie's name trended again, but not as a novelty. This time she was called what she had always been, a pioneer. Interviews followed, but she limited them, choosing to highlight her center, her students, and the wider community of deaf performers. Her only solo appearance was for a documentary on artistic inclusion, where she told her story one more time, not for fame, but for the record, for history. In the final scene of the documentary, Ellie is shown walking through the center's garden now in full bloom. Children play in the background. Wind chimes hang from the trees, moving not from sound, but from motion sensors triggered by footsteps. The narrator's voice fades out, replaced by soft music. And then, for the last few seconds, the screen goes completely silent. No sound. Just Ellie, sitting under the large tree in the center courtyard, signing the words, "You do not need to hear the music to be the song." The documentary premiered to standing ovations at several film festivals and became required viewing in arts education programs across the country. Parents wrote letters. Teachers began integrating signed music into school concerts. University programs began expanding their curriculum to include accessibility and adaptive performance. Ellie was invited to serve as a guest lecturer at conservatories that had once taught only the classics. Now they were reimagining those classics through new forms: signing, movement, vibration, light. It was not just about including deaf performers. It was about redefining what performance could be. Months later, Lennox joined her at the groundbreaking of their second facility, this one opening in the Midwest. It was smaller, but the mission remained. More centers were planned, more programs funded, more lives touched. He had become a full-time advocate, letting others headline while he worked behind the scenes. He no longer sought the spotlight. Instead, he worked to build stages where others could shine. When asked how he had changed so drastically, he replied, "I finally shut up long enough to understand something." It was not about giving voice. It was about making space for voices that had always been there. And once you learn how to listen that way, you cannot unlearn it. You do not want to. Years passed. Trends came and went. Fame shifted, as it always does. But the work continued. The choirs grew. The performances multiplied. And Ellie Harper remained at the center, not as a celebrity, but as a quiet force. Her story entered classrooms. Her videos were taught in music theory and disability studies alike. Statues were offered. She declined. Titles were offered. She refused. She never wanted to be a monument. She wanted to be momentum. She wanted children to look at her and see movement, not stillness. The one thing she accepted was a scholarship in her name, given every year to a student who defied convention through art. The recipients came from everywhere, different nations, different languages, different modes of communication, but all of them shared one thing, the belief that art could transcend limitations. And every year, when she presented the scholarship, Ellie made the same promise to each recipient. Your story matters. Your voice counts, even if the world has not heard it yet. Then, one quiet evening, she returned to the original studio where it all began. It was empty now, the show between seasons. A janitor let her in with a gentle nod. She walked the empty hall, stood on the same spot, and looked out at the vacant audience seats. It looked smaller now, or maybe she had just grown. She stood still for a moment. Then, just once, she signed the entire song she had performed that night. Not for cameras, not for applause, not for a crowd, just for herself. And when it ended, she smiled. We all judge. We all fail to see what is in front of us. But the greatest stories do not come from perfect vision. They come from those brave enough to see differently. Ellie Harper was mocked for not singing the way the world expected. But in doing so, she taught the world to listen in a way it never had before. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. Have you ever felt underestimated or watched someone rise above assumptions to become something extraordinary? Share your stories in the comments below. And remember, the most powerful voices are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the quiet ones, signing the truth with their hands, their hearts, and their courage. See you in our next story, where another lesson in humanity awaits.